platform and dialogues. My
Sabine,
name is...
we haven't started yet. It's still
okay.
up. Okay.
Tell me when.
Count to 5 and you'll be up.
Okay. Welcome to Humanity Rising and the 293rd live broadcast of this Catalyst for Change platform and dialogues. My name is Sabine von Gafke, and I'm hosting today's session, as are Jim Garrison, who hosts it each and every day, and also Leslie, who's been helping this week. Jim is away at a retreat with Joe Dispenza. He'll be back next week, I'm sure, with a lot of insights from that. And in the meantime, I have the pleasure to be hosting today's session and to be back again hosting Humanity Rising, as I've been part of it from time to time since we started in May of last year. Now, as I've mentioned before, and it's always interesting to mention it again, we are truly living in a time where there is an urgency for global conversations, and conversations that also propel and hopefully lead to inspired actions that make a difference, and that can help us navigate our way and direction for a new regenerative world, and hopefully a reintegrated and unified humanity. Now, conversations are also based on the art of language and how we cultivate and use language. And it's on this topic that we're today honored with yet another impactful conversation. And this time it is on the imperative topic of the future of language in the age of information technology. Now, we're currently living in an age of, let's say, dataism, or an era of instant transmissions that allows the storage of mega units of text and speech in many audio and video formats. And while, of course, this virtual communication tool has its functional and it really benefits us in many ways, it also dramatically changes the value and use of language, probably in a way that we yet haven't really understood. And as much as there are obvious benefits to this multiple virtual communication, there are also potential drawbacks, like I said, that are unimaginable to us maybe now. And with the current phenomena that we've also spoken a lot about in Humanity Rising, of fake news that sort of simulate and manipulate linguistic content, it sort of also casts doubt on the preservation of truth and meaningful discourse within virtual environments. And this sort of deterioration of meaningful content creates, or can create, an ideology of progress that focuses on the speed and quantity of exchange language, and that can create a severe imbalance. It is already creating a severe imbalance between the living word as an instrument of contact between people and the sort of mediated and electronically transmitted language that is the virtual language. Now, for this session on language, we really have a pleasure and are thrilled to welcome back Ludwig Max Fischer, who is a sacred word activist, among other things, and who was an appreciated and really inspirational guest when he talked about the topic of language in a previous session. I think it was session 249, in case you want to check it out later. And this topic felt so important that we decided to welcome back Ludwig again today to give him the opportunity to dive even deeper into the originating power of language and the sacred word, and really present his continued insights and perspectives into the current crisis of meaning that we're in, the credibility, and truth in public and private discourse, as well as discussing practical ways in which to reclaim our natural abilities towards the exchange of authentic, conscious, and truthful language. Now, before I introduce and welcome back Ludwig, I'd like us all to join together, like we always do in Humanity Rising, in a 1-minute heartfelt, coherent meditation. Just that stillness for 1 minute. Still our mind, open our hearts, and gently arrive here and now for this conversation for the next 1.5 hours. So with that, we take a breath in and out and just listen to our heartbeat and feel the connection. Thank you for joining that mindful time. And it's such a great and potent way to really, bring us back to here and now and just have a stillness and be open to different perspectives and dialogues. So with that, it's a pleasure to welcome back Ludwig Max Fischer, who is a PhD professor emeritus for the past 35 years and has taught German literature, comparative ethology, and humanities at several universities. And he is a university language and literature teacher, has published scholars in the areas of ecolinguistics and intercultural communication. And beyond his career as a teacher and scholar, he's also studied in depth the history of natural healing methods. And in addition to his love for poetry and literature, he also has this deep interest in psychology and holistic living and natural nutrition, and has published and translated several books on these subjects. He's also a passionate and very knowledgeable Herman Hesse scholar and has written 2 books on Herman Hesse, and his 3rd book is on the way. And hopefully he'll be talking more about that during our conversation. Now, Herman Hesse, as many of you know, one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature back in 1946, and whose work includes The Season of the Soul, Damien, Siddhartha, Steppenwolf, and much more. And truly an author and poet who I would say thought and through his literature has sort of galvanized a sense of humanity and a sense of humaneness. It really brings the work of the soul, the love, inspiration, mystery of nature to life, as he really was an active witness in turbulent times and has this vast social consciousness that he conveys in his books that are as relevant today as when he wrote them. So with that, let's start today's session. And for all of our viewers in the Zoom chat, please do send in your questions in the chat function or Q&A function, as I'll be hosting some questions at the end of this session. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand over the word to Ludwig Max Fischer. So welcome, Ludwig.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabinia. And this was a wonderful introduction. So it set up the whole conversation. And, even that little meditation that we did, we heard the sound, we heard the sacredness of sound, because in the beginning, it says in John, Gospel of John, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word has become flesh. But actually, there's another way to translate that. And that is en arche en hologos. That's the Greek version of it. And there we could say also in the beginning, there was sound, the world of sound. Before I get into the 8 points that I would like to make today with you, I want to give you just a very brief overview. I believe that we have forgotten a lot of essential characteristics of language, or we have neglected them. Now, not all cultures have done that, but the typical Western way of thinking, that post-Enlightenment way of dealing with reality, with the dominant science, doesn't lay great emphasis or doesn't think very highly of what they will dismiss more as the esoteric aspects of language. But, esoteric, that word, shouldn't be used in a pejorative sense, because it just means inner, the inner workings of language. And there's a lot more happening inside as we think we transport something that is a material set of letters in great quantities and great speed across the planet. Because we may, or maybe we actually do, omitting some quintessential content and context. So these 8 points I would like to make briefly with you is just like opening up a window. And then I will recommend some books and there will be some homework because, you know, after all, I was a teacher for 40 years. So, but anyway, but just for people who might think that this is a particular aspect that interests me more and it interests me on the deeper level. And then I will end with the poet Herman Hesse, actually. And I'm so excited that I found a poem by Herman Hesse that has the title Sprache. And that's a German word for language. It is a poem about language itself. So that will be then opening up a questions and comments, and we'll see. And I will do my best to pretend that I have answers. All right, so now we have the opportunity to talk everybody in the world, but mostly in English. And that this could be a problem. How could this be a problem? Well, there are some people who think this is the second wave of colonialism. First, there was the geographic colonialism. Now there's the linguistic colonialism. Isn't it best if everybody just communicates in English? So there was a movement that I participated in as an academic called the ecology of language, or ecolinguistics. So a lot of people are not aware of that. You know, we do have at this point still about 6,000 languages in the world, and we're losing about one per week. And, well, what is lost? It's just these little languages, and they're much better off in economic terms in many ways if they communicate with the rest of the world in English. So there is actually a British gentleman who wrote, I think, a very important book. His name is Robert Phillipson, and he wrote a book called Linguistic Imperialism. So could there be something wrong with English? Of course, couldn't be anything wrong with English, and otherwise it would not ever become the world language. Well, when we speak, write, think, imagine in a particular language, we follow a structure. And in English, for example, it has specific characteristics. So the cultural history and actually the consciousness of a particular culture is encoded in the language. So when you use it, you are actually putting a certain kind of grid over the reality. There are certain things you cannot say in English. If you ever get in the opportunity to translate a poem, and sometimes, you know, I sit for days and I say, well, I can't say that in English. No matter how I twist and turn it, there's no word for it. So in every language, every other language, we have a variety of devices to approach our world, our reference to the world. So I want to give you an example. This supposedly happened in the legislature in Georgia, US state of Georgia. And there was a debate about bilingualism. That's a big issue in the US. So, because there are many people, particularly in California and then in Texas and particularly in Florida. And they said, well, you know, we want our bills and our different, you know, when we get a driver's license, we want that in our language. We pretty much have, or even close to, being a majority. And so finally, a conservative member got up and said, I've had it with these Hispanics. If English was good enough for Jesus, it should be good enough for them. So somebody said, really? How about that English of Jesus? And that member of this political body said, well, haven't you read the King James Bible? The King James Bible. Well, about 1,600 years later. So there are a lot of theologians, actually, who have done a lot of research on what actually were the words of Jesus within that Christian faith that plays a key role. And actually found that linguistic proof that we only can say with some certainty that 18% of what is canonized in the Christian Bible can be traced. And much we can trace to some medieval monks that wrote, and some other people that translated earlier from Hellenistic Greek. And so we have a long trail of trying to find what is actually here the original message. So if we listen then or read, or we have sermons, these are the words. And then particularly, the Protestant Revolution or Reformation was about, well, this clergy has become so decadent in the Middle Ages. It was all about privilege. The Pope, they lived really a good life. But what is the essence of this faith? We have to go back to the faith. And Martin Luther, in his key translation of the Bible, was saying, well, we have to go by the word. But the word, which word? And what is the original word? And how do we find it? So I'll give you an example of what some of this research has resulted in. There is a researcher by the name of Neil Douglas Klotz, and he wrote a book about the prayer, the Aramaic original words. And it says, "Our Father, thou art in heaven." I mean, everybody knows that, right? Sure. The Father, and it's in heaven. Well, in recent times, feminists had a little bit of a problem with that, with the Father. What about the Mother? So it turns out that this sentence in the original would be sounding something like Abavuna de Bashmaya. Well, so this first word can be translated actually as our Father, perfectly correct. But it also can be translated as our Mother, because the original has a meaning of mother or father in the sense of those who have gone before us, our ancestors in the spiritual world. Now, when we look at this dad in heaven, I have another big problem, because that heaven, of course, is up. We have a whole way of thinking in the West where up is good and down is bad. Now, I hope that your computer stays up today and that you feel up today and you don't feel down, because there's something bad about down. We all know that for sure. But this last word, heaven, means actually in the greater realms that are above and below us. It's kind of a vertical axis. Now, could change the whole thing. What would we have done in the world of agriculture if we all would have been praying, "Our Mother, thou art in the earth"? Would we have come to a conclusion like the Native Americans, and they say, "How can you tear up the breast of our mother?" With a plow? No, with a bigger machine. So where do we place the sacred? Well, certainly above, right? I mean, we want to go above too. We are in an age of literalisms. We even have right now people that are going way up very soon. And I even read that in California, there are real estate companies, and you can be real estate and buy real estate on Mars and the moon, and you better get in that act soon. So, translation. So that means we have a specific world concept that is English as a formal language, as it has established itself. Let me give you another example. At one point, I was taking a doctoral seminar in America, philosophy department, on Heidegger's Sein und Zeit. Oh, that's really heavy. Being and time. So I thought I'd get a head start and start reading it in English, in German, in the original. So I started reading it in German. Very, very, very tough. Oh, these sentences of these German philosophers. They go on and on over a page or two, and I only understood very little. I needed a lot of commentary. Then I thought, well, now the English starts. So I started then to read in English. I tell you, it was so much clearer. There were about between 5 and 8 sentences in English. You know, because German has that device of relative clauses. It puts a certain vertical axis into language. So you can talk for a long time and you really don't know yet where the verb is. That means, what is the action actually? So you built a context. This is one of the big problems with our modern machine languages. That, and when we put them into the machines, we want a verification of an intention. So another little story. So there's an American student studying in Germany. He made a new friend, and he's late for the lecture of the professor. So he says to his friend, what is he talking about? I don't understand the word. His German was already pretty good. And his German friend said, you know, I don't know either. He hasn't gotten to the verb yet. So we have that verb end position in German, and that clarifies what's happening. What does that mean in the thinking of a person? So you have to get to the point much faster, because English is a language that it depends on the sequence of words. A linear sequence, subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object, subject, verb, object. It's interesting that that word, object, actually, it is a language where there's an I that has an intention, and then has an action, and then is being kind of opposed for something. That word object actually comes from Latin. If something is throwing itself against you, is an obstacle. So you have then the German word Gegenstand, which means that which stands against you. And that's, of course, the attitude of the Western mind in the last few hundred years, where it asserts itself against these terribly imposing limitations of nature. So I want to say actually here a very basic insight, I think that is important, that when we deal with the Western languages, by the way, not all which are Indo-European languages, we're dealing with a worldview, with a word view that sets up a whole course of progress. And that progress has been defined now after we have the British empiricists and the French materialists and the whole age of enlightenment as a domination ideology. And we're trying to liberate ourselves at this point in the holistic paradigm shift from this domination ideology, because we realized that our various machines, chemical, technological manipulation of our world that we live in, has reached a limit and has become very destructive in many areas. So the next step has to be that we need to listen again more what nature talks to us. What does it say to us? So this listening is a inconvenient thing because it means reflection. It means that I'm not in charge, I'm not in control. So a lot of the ideology of progress is actually a defense against progression. Those natural progressions, the biological progressions, and also the inspiration, the spiritual progressions. When a poet writes a poem, I'm thinking right now, for example, what happened when Bob Dylan wrote during the luncheon break of the studio musicians a new song? Where did that come from? Inspiration. So there is a spiritual dimension of language. And that's where we have problems with what do we use that in cyberspace. Because it is that inspiration that the poet sometimes waits for a week or labors over. It slows us. Did I use that word before? It slows us down. Terrible thing. So right now we have we have the word on speed. And how much meaning is lost. And I will talk about a little bit later about what actually generates, creates, produces meaning. So we need to look again at dimensions of language and factors that we tend upon and need to cultivate. And there, I want to first talk a moment about when you use a sentence, do you know where these vowels come from? Do you know where these consonants come from? Have you ever heard or read how these vowels are actually related to the planets? Where do you say this ah and this e and this e? It just occurred. No, where did it come from? Is that related to the development of human consciousness that we're able to do that? Is that a privilege or is it a gift? And it's something that we are reproducing with a certain responsibility of maybe respect or even gratefulness for the source. That's where religious people would attribute it, often in many theories of the origin of language. Oh, and that is a huge topic in many cultures. There's usually mythology about it. And so where do they come from? So the consonants, for example, there is a thinking where they are related to the elements, air, water, earth. You cannot hold a consonant for a long time, right? You cannot say a P or a T. So these consonants and vowels, they resonate in you, and you first need an antenna. And the antenna, those are your ears. And these ears are able to, within the range of about 16 to 19,000 hertz, we have measured that, and we have a range for that, a human ear. There are some other animals who have actually greater ranges. Incidentally, we're not the only one who have language. The whales, for example, until recently, were way ahead of us with global transmission of messages. By the way, their sounds are highly complicated and contain enormous amount of messages and information. And they are able to send a word, a message, around the globe, around the whole planet in about 12 and a half hours. Now, we only beat them recently. So the energetics of language, they're lost when we are in text. So this is very, very important that we are cultivating our receptive organic instruments for language. And the ear has been neglected because it's able to distinguish very, very subtle frequencies. And then it transmits these frequencies as a message to your brain, and then your breath is important, and then your vocal cords, and then this oral cavity actually is it's like, look at it more like a temple in which the word, the living word, is being enacted and going then out into the world. I want to just hold up a book that is a wonderful book in this regard by Jocelyn Godwin called The Mystery of the Seven Vowels. How they are related, where they origin. It is fascinating that when we look at the different tones, in music, our regular scale in the West that we use usually, it turns out, and it really blew my mind when I found that out, that if you we know very precisely the length of the orbits of the different planets. It's a very exact mathematical number. So if you move this up or down mathematically, according to the law of octaves, you can come up to a completely different frequency, to an audible frequency. And that is then refers and is the reflection exactly of a specific tone in our scale. So C, D, E, F, G, B, C again. The work of Hans Cousteau, C-O-U-S-T-O, is very interesting there. And the work of a good old friend of mine who in the meantime has moved on across the threshold to the spiritual world, Joachim Ernst Behrendt, The Third Ear, The World is Sound, and Nada Brahma. Those are the books that have been translated into English. And he really goes into how deep this element of sound is creating the world that we live in. And then something that is completely usually ignored, I want to point out to you is I love this little book. It's actually a big book. It's about the alphabet. That's a whole history, a fascinating history. And where does this alphabet come from? And what does this mean that you have these different writing systems like the Chinese or the Japanese or others? What is encoded there? And if we reenact these letters, there is an author by the name of Berg who wrote a book about the Hebrew letters as an energy code. So when you form these letters, my good friend Wimela Rogers actually has the International Institute of Handwriting. And you are focusing and you're expressing your personality. The science of graphology, very important in different cultures and has a big tradition. Or the calligraphy as a way of personal growth. So we omit that, we eliminate that. When we text, there's so much to be lost. There was an abbot around 1500, a few years after Gutenberg. His name was Johannes Trithemius. And he said, our monks these days, it's terrible with this new printing press. Now they used to copy these important statements in the Bible, and it took them weeks. And that was way too short. He said a sentence like, in the beginning there was the Word, and in Word has become flesh, verbum caro factum est. And they move on from that sentence after a few weeks. That's ridiculous. It takes a lot more meditation to understand that sentence. So you might have seen pictures of the Book of Kells or the Lindisfarne Gospel, that art of the illuminated initials as an art form, and then you focus on that individual letter. Now, I'm saying we kind of have changed, or in the process of changing this world, actually towards, in the beginning there was the Word, and the Word has become flesh. To another statement that would be, and in the end there was Word perfect, and it moved to flash drive. So the ear and our ability to listen to these sounds that are actually produced in a much larger scale and show the presence of the cosmic nature of language. Now, we have devalued the ear in a great way. And I have to say that one of my major influences is a man by the name of Jacques Ellul. Jacques Ellul, French professor of theology, a very important poem. He wrote The Technological Society. And he literally says the future of humanity depends on whether we can save the word from its exit into its automatic commodification. And he wrote a book that I highly recommend. It's called The Humiliation of the Word. The Humiliation of the Word. Because the word is our way to, in a direct, energetic way, to the earth, to nature, and to spirit. It's like a bridge. And what is lost in a bridge? So as you listen to me, you probably think, this guy is a Luddite. And his name, Ludwig, probably should be written with double D. And but I don't make it that easy, because right now we have such an incredible, forceful ideology that if you don't go along with this artificial intelligence, with this artificial approach to language, then you are simply behind and you have to get with the program. Well, I'm not saying at all. I'm saying I wouldn't participate in a program of what I consider a very valuable, incredibly great resource, this Humanity Rising, that whole undertaking of Ubiquity University. But one more time, we're dealing with ecological parameters and ecological balances. I very much love the work of called sacred balance, sacred balances. And there we have all the different elements, like the air and the water explained. But not just explained, but there's much more to water. So when we functionalize everything, I'm referring here to David Suzuki, great man. So there's more to water than H2O. We think now that we have quantified the material world to the highest degree, we only have to do a little bit more, maybe a lot more, but it's the same direction. Then we know everything about water. So, but Victor Schauberger, for example, said, well, there's something else happening actually. Why is that trout able to stand in the middle of that big current? What is happening in that flow of the water? And then the sacred use of water. So as we materialize and quantify everything, we are losing connection. We're losing connection to all that is natural, organic within us and without us, which of course there's everything that was without us is within us, and macrocosm is reflected directly in microcosm. So now, just a word about what creates a meaningful word. Meaning. Well, you all want to say something meaningful, don't we? Well, there's again an ecological balance here. We have subscribed these days to the more words you have, and the more you can transfer, the more information you have, and it's again a quantitative way of looking at it. But there's actually a defensive inattention. What do you do with your 300 emails every day? So there is a way to give meaning to your words. And the meaning actually happens first that you dealing with an open perception, and that your perception, and then as it comes also from direct interaction of your senses with the natural world, but also in your imagination. And your imagination these days is mostly occupied territory by advertisement. So when I say to you, think of a cowboy that is out there in the wilderness, and then you see that he's smoking, and then you can too be in this wonderful setting, and everything is so pristine and still wild, the mythology of the Wild West. And then you can also have the taste of freedom and adventure. Now, you wouldn't think right away of a cigarette, particular one, right? Well, so what I'm saying is that the word which I'm looking for, that you're trying to give meaning, is occupied territory. It's even trademarked. And you know what? I'm not loving it. I'm not loving it. So, and there are words that are just commodified, that where your associations are taken and your own ability to express something with a fresh meaning is actually commodified. I recently had to laugh when I saw a furniture store advertised, "Come to the Temple of Savings." And then I saw another billboard that said there were a brewery that brewed 4 different beers. And you said, join a fine family of beers. Wouldn't you want to be a part of a fine family? But you can. You just joined that fine family of beers. So the imagination has to be freed again. And I think that's a crucial subject. And here I am looking, if you permit me for a moment, not looking at the camera, a book that has influenced me a great deal, and a writer by the name of Georg Kühlewind. Georg Kühlewind is a Hungarian philosopher. I wonder whether it's an accident these days. Hungarian is a non-Indo-European language. Basque and Finnish is also. Different language allows another way of thinking. So Goethe said, if you don't know another language, you don't know anything about your own. But I see that I will move on at this point to give you a poem, because I think it's always good to move into that poetic space, the mythic space. By the way, please don't use the word myth in a pejorative way, because a myth is a story that never was, but always is. And the fact is a momentary data that will disappear within a second and change its meaning within a minute. So, the ancient Greeks were not that stupid. I'm sure they were not. When they went up Mount Olympus, this is where Zeus lived, right? They didn't think there was a guy up there and you could shake his hand. One of the biggest issues today with language is that we are unlearning our connection with symbolic language. Why did Jesus and why did the great prophets, why did they speak in parables? We are learning to think in symbols and in analogies. It's all about analysis, critical, isolation, discern, kritikos. Well, that's certainly very important, but we have to relearn to understand symbols. Symbolane. A symphony. This is the coming together of two realms. So the natural dimension and the spiritual dimension are interacting in every single word that you say. So it is a sacred act. So here is a poem, though, I want to give you before we have all these wonderful comments and the questions. As I said, I definitely will pretend to have answers. I'm used to that. I did that for a long time. But here is this poem that I found, and I was so happy when I found it, by Herman Hesse. And by the way, this should be, maybe for you, could be a little motivation to join me in October 4th, when we start a webinar on Herman Hesse, because that's when we can go much deeper into practical applications of how do we revive, reclaim, reverse. What is the word verse in there? You know that John Charlie once said, New York poet, an ulcer, gentlemen, is an unspoken, unwritten poem. There we can go into how to work energetically with language in order to change blocks, inhibitions in the body. We're walking alphabet, actually, a walking set of vowels and letters. I mentioned that in my last podcast. It's the science and the discipline of chirophonetics. But anyway, here's that poem by Herman Hesse. It has 35 lines. And just listen to it in a way, what he does. How does he refer to the world as something that happens outside, seemingly, and then how does he move it inside? And I think it's a treat. Here it comes. The sun speaks to us through light. Flowers speak through fragrance and color. The air communes through clouds and snow and rain. An irrepressible desire resides in the inner sanctum of the world to overcome the silence between things, to express the secrets of existence through word and gesture, sound and color. Here starts the shining source of art. This world yearns for expression, wants to be known to spirit, and overflows from human lips with timeless wisdom. All life longs for language and word perfect and Windows 12. Oh, I'm sorry, I got in the wrong line. I have to repeat that. All life longs for language. We conjure up deep intuitions, clothe them with words, numbers, lines, and tones, and build forever a higher throne of wisdom. The red and blue of flowers, the verses of a poet, point to the inner forces of creation, always beginning and never ending. Wherever sound and word unite, where songs soar and art unfolds, the world each time receives its purpose. This whole existence is recreated. And every song and every book and every picture reveals a thousandth fresh attempt to fulfill the oneness of all life. Poetry and music want to entice you to come and join this unity. One glance into a mirror will confirm it. Whatever we encounter as disjointed becomes clear and simple in a poem. The flower laughs, the cloud becomes rain, the world has soul, and silence speaks. Now, the world has soul, the re-ensoulment, and silence speaks. So in German, and I'm just going to give you this one line, Die Welt hat Sinn, das Stumme spricht. Now, if you look at a word in a poem, and great poems play very deliberately with the vowels and the interaction between the consonants and the vowels. So if you look at the vowel of E, Italian E, now it is resonating up here. E. Now the E is resonating more at your shoulder level. The A is resonating at your middle of your chest in the heart sound. The O is like the Buddha belly, the round O. And then the U is like your pelvic bowl. So if you in the morning, I recommend sometimes have a vowel movement in the shower, wherever. Maybe not disturbing somebody. And then you see how that you clear the vowels. It has a profound effect actually on your mind and on your body. But hear how the poet plays. Die Welt. So he starts out with the spiritual, die. So the energy is placed up here. And then die Welt. Then it goes into the horizontal. Welt, that's the world. That's the world of action. Hat. Then the next step is to bring that to the heart. The A sound, die Welt hat. And then you go back up to the spiritual resonance. Then the last words, you start again from the heart, das, simple article, but das. There's no accident that he uses that word. Das Stumme, that which is silent, that which is stored deep inside you. That is the U sound. That is in English the root. Then you have to go all the way down to the source. That means to the physical source, everything that is stored. And then to the humus, to the humility, these U sounds. And then you can go up, back up to the spiritual, spricht, spricht. Then you have the I again. So if you dance these words, the vowels, so you gave you just you would have an E, A, A, E, and you have an A, U, E again. And you could play with that with the poem. Try that sometimes with the poem in English. How the poet has arranged the energetics of that word. And of course, that only comes across in the enacted, living word. I have a good friend by the name of Philip Shepard. He has something called the embodied present process. So what I'm trying to do is I try to liberate at least some of the time when you use the word from being just used in a commodified way. And I'm talking about the ecological balance. That means I'm not trying to eliminate the E word, So if you pay attention to that, you can get a lot of benefits. The embodied presence of the word in my work. So that's what I want to invite you to. And that's why I want to invite you to a webinar in October, where we are not going to do analysis of poem and literary criticism. I did that for 40 years. And I did my publishing or perish. I didn't perish. But we're not going to just look at pentameters and hexameters and do all this one. What does the poem mean? Oh, what a question. No, we're going to see how does it relate? How does it relate? What does it do with us, in us? And how can we relate to the world outside and inside by means of a vital word, a revitalized word? So I think at this point we are at the full hour, and I said everything that can be said about language. I used to do these courses, Western civilization. Oh my God, cover a century in a week. And then we require courses. Actually, it was good that people get an overview. But so I have to confess that I left a lot of things still unsaid. But I say with a poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, who said, I have faith in all that has not yet become word. I'm working on the unsayable. You said, we are the bees of the invisible. And the invisible, or the not yet heard, comes to us through language. And that is such a precious gift that we should handle it with care. And I feel that we're in danger of losing a big part if we are not using these new tools that electronic language gives us very carefully. And please do not interpret my words as throw away your computer and never text again. That is, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be identified that easily and fast as an enemy of the obvious and inevitable and speed of the only progress that we can conceive. No, I'm just saying that there is much deeper, wider. There is an ocean that is happening with every sentence. It is filled with many, many, many gifts and many challenges because it takes effort. It will take effort. If you cultivate your handwriting, for example, if you memorize a poem, so then we activate something. It recently, research has shown that there's a delay in dementia when people actually learn or know a second language. And in the beginning childhood language acquisition, there is a significant increase if a child is growing up bilingually. I'm not going here into the brain and language because we're trying to, I was in the seminar once, the teacher brought in a brain actually. It was a seminar on the biology of language. And we looked at where the centers are, and it's another subject. So there are many, many, many other exciting and interesting subjects, but I try to be today a little bit more, put a focus on something that is usually either neglected, dismissed, or often misunderstood by the current scientific academic ideology that puts its own way of thinking as the exclusive way that how we need to deal with language. So, shall we see what kind of questions or comments or whatever you would like to say?
Well, first of all, I would like to say, and on behalf of, I'm sure, all of our viewers, once again, such a profound and eloquent way to really convey the potency of language and the importance of language and words and everything that you developed and spoke about here. And I'm going to take a few questions from the audience, but tapping into a bit about what you spoke about with words. And I know you spoke of it also in the prior session that you had, sort of how words, the energetic power of words and language also can make us immune to perceiving or receiving, for example, hate speeches, fake news, or whatever it might be in that context. Could you just elaborate and remind us a bit about that? You've talked about it a little bit, but sort of in that context.
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to use the F word here.
You're the master of the language, so you use the words that you...
I didn't know about the F word, or the C word. I once had to find out what the C word is. And then there's the N word, we have strong language. Actually, our language is very weak. What do we mean by strong language? We mean words that convey an insult. But our language has become weak, except in these words, or in these curse words, or in these words which carry an emotional charge. But have you noticed that if you say to somebody, you know, I love you, I'll love you, or I bless you, that kind of language is atrophying in our world, in our modern Western world. So, and when language doesn't work anymore as a vehicle, or it is moved into its very drastic forms of hate speech. For hate speech, of course, you need a scapegoat. You need something that you deny within yourself as an issue, and there's somebody else who's out there. But after you eliminated that person from their, whatever they are, or even completely that you killed that person, and you know, then everything will be fine again. Well, of course, that's a very strange and persistent illusion. So we need to look again at and feel again the words in a deeper way. I think that the science of mantras is very helpful. There, I think you can find access again to the sacred use of language. We have a little bit in the West, hallelujah, Kyrie eleison, amen. We have, you know, we have ways of celebrating a sacred expression and then bring really our full heart and our full body and our mind and our soul to it. And that fact that it's stronger, our language is stronger these days in the curse words and the insulting words is a very bad sign of the weakness of how we have abused language itself. I'm thinking here actually at the moment about a good book by Larry Dossey, medical doctor, Healing Words, and the actual power of prayer in healing when someone is having an illness, serious illness. So I think as we cultivate the living word again, I think we are going back to a deep resource, and we can reactivate. I don't think it's totally lost. It's not lost. Every person has it in them. And as you balanced your use of electronic language with actually spoken language and with great poems. I mean, there's a reason why people are so excited about Rumi, for example, these days. What an incredible, but you know, Rumi, you have to read Rumi out loud, and then you have to memorize a short poem even. And if you use that in the morning, for example, for a few minutes, your day will be different because there's a direct channel. This is one of the great spiritual poets. That is a connecting line to spiritual wisdom. And that will have a profound impact possibly on your depression. So I would say it's a matter of changing your attitude, your basic attitude towards language. Don't let it drift off completely into your habits of texting and talking to people via your iPhone. And I'm not saying you throw away an iPhone, I didn't say that, but there's a danger here that I characterized with the following sentence. Everybody is present now with everybody who is absent. In order to be absent with everybody who is present. Has it ever bothered you I have examples of being in a restaurant and a man and a woman having I don't know what they're having, but they're having lunch together, I guess. But I counted that for 51 minutes, each one of them was on the phone, on their iPhone, with someone else who was somewhere else. So it's an interruption of presence, and it's an interruption of when you're in a conversation, which is really an incredibly magic and sacred event, when two human beings really are fully in conversation. Then does that happen when you are in a mediated conversation? I think there's so much more present. So don't lose that. Just balance it. And go through the effort, because it's worth it. It's a cultivation of the primary ways that language works through us and with us. And here I come back maybe at the end to, before we have another comment, what Heidegger says. It is not that we are commanding the commanders of language, but there's actually languages shaping our mind and therefore our actions. And a specific language does it in a specific way. And therefore, if we lose a language, we lose a way of dealing with the world. And actually, I just read the research report that by the end of this century, there is an estimate that we will lose 12,500 medicinal plants that indigenous people in various parts of the world know what they are using them for. So those are different ways of relating to the way we live in our lives. And to have a monoculture again. You know, we do the same thing now with language that we did with agriculture. You know, we have speed and quantity. We have that wheat and we hybridize it and who could argue that we can double the harvest with our pesticides and insecticides? Right now we have a lot of pesticides in our language. So what is going on here when suddenly so many people have problems with their digestion and illnesses with the colon? What is happening here? Have we modified maybe this plant called wheat too fast? And we have eliminated all these other intruders, even though we figured out that they were for a whole ecologically sustainable harvest very important. Well, I want to say thank you, Rachel Carson, in 1962, writing, say, Silent Spring. Because she said, wait a minute. The quantitative increase caused a qualitative decrease. And on top of that, there were tremendous negative side effects to that dramatic gain that we thought we had. So I think let's not repeat that with language. Now we realize, as we have a re-emerging focus on organic agriculture, it's a great, great, great movement, that it is actually the ecological context that is extremely important. And it is that we need to listen what nature tells us, and that there is so much of true wisdom and practical application that the devalued people in the so-called the developing countries, nations. They have a lot to offer, and they have a lot to offer also in their languages, because their languages grasp connections, contacts, sequences in nature. And when we can connect to that, we will have a tremendous gain, a long-term gain. So there's something impatient, and I would say adolescent. I think there's some kind of what drives right now the technological chemical progress has something of adolescent fantasies. It's a disease that I call permanentitis. So the ego is afraid of the progressions because natural progressions do lead to the end of biological life, death. And we kind of steal ourselves out by taking human faculties and taking limits imposed by nature, and we take it out, taking it into externalized artificial devices, which at will we can exit and enter. And of course, we can store them very carefully externally. Have you ever wondered whether how much you store externally, that it might have an effect of how much your natural memory might be negatively affected by that? I know people now, they don't know their own phone numbers anymore. They push a button. So what is lost here? I'm talking what is lost. I'm not talking about going back. I recently had this incredible article. David Loy, L-O-Y, is a Buddhist. If you find him, David Loy. And he wrote an incredible article called The Lack of Progress in Technology. The lack of progress, because we're seeming to try to escape from something. I say we're using progress, externalized faculties, transmitted, stored, and then functionalized. We're using these externalized words in order to replace primary references. So we're not prisoners of progression anymore, but permanentitis has succeeded. And then these kind of people, it's very expensive, but that's what our billionaires seem to have a tendency and interest in. And then you have your body, of course, frozen, and you wake up again on Mars, and a few thousand years later. Well, there is a fear that drives that, a panic, I will call it. So there's an immense amount of investment right now that goes into this artificializing of everything, of that we have as natural, as a natural world, and of course, reducing that non-controllable impact that inspiration and influence that comes from the spiritual world. Are there any questions, comments?
There are some questions, Ludwig, and I'm going to take one from the audience or our viewers in the Zoom chat, and it's Leo Jacobi who asks, can you say more about the relationship of language and silence? I'm thinking of Max Pickard's 1953 meditation, The World of Silence.
All right. That's a great question. So there's a good book. Max Picard wrote a book about silence. So there's somebody who recorded the great speakers of the world, and he cut out all the words and just left the silences between the word, and then looked at the energetics of the silence. So there's another disease, television speech and advertising speech, where you cannot afford silence. So what wants to emerge in what is within a person, what wants to be expressed, needs these breaks, because that's where the deeper connection is made. That's where that listening to the inner wisdom then finds its way through breath, the vocal cords, and through the lips out into reaching the next person. So there is a silence in which, like in the poem that I read, where something is suppressed. You know, we had at one point, I think, some leaders in the Christian world. They're talking about the silent majority. And I think sometimes I think we have to deal these days with the silenced word, with the silenced speaker, because we have to press very hard and fast forward, and we have to perform speech. It has to be very, very pleasing. It has to be perfect, performed perfection. But there is something that's kind of the word with a lot of, I would say, too much emphasis on the face of the word, on the good-looking face and the perfect face. So, and there's nothing. This is not an argument against beauty, but what I'm saying is that authentic speech depends in its creation of a meaningful interaction on giving silence the permission to be present in unhurried intervals in every verbal interaction. So there's a reason why the different meditation practices. And by the way, I think within that Christian tradition, I like what the Quakers do. You don't have somebody, a preacher that has studied the art of speaking with great persuasion, but you speak until the Spirit moves you. That's part of their religious service. And maybe what is said then has a greater significance than when you feel this incredible, you know, in a huge stadium with 50,000 people and huge sound system, and you have it's a huge bombardment with the truth. Well, give it a chance to be absorbed, give it a chance for reflection, and then see what is coming back from the person. That's why I think that dialogue work, I'm thinking here of Krishnamurti, that some friends of mine are doing, that is actually very, very important. That meeting of two spirits, two souls, that is happening in authentic dialogue. So silence is an intricate part and is largely eliminated because of, well, I have 30 seconds. If I can get 25 words in, and but if I get 35 words in, I can mention 7 articles that I want to sell instead of 5. And then, of course, so much more is said. And then we, of course, we know so much more, and we have so much information. And everything is going to be so much better because people really know what they should buy and where they should go and where they can get it. Really? Really? Well, we don't have time. You have time. Well, can we make time? Do we actually have time for authentic, living exchange through language? Could we consider that as a worthy project?
Definitely. And just tying into that, where do you see with your profound knowledge? I mean, we have the discussion here, we have a dialogue here, and, you know, we have a vast amount of people viewing this. But to sort of take that torch for each and every one of us to really be a champion for the cultivation of language in all its different spectrums, what are your sort of pieces of advice? Where, I mean, it's the mantras, it's prayer, but what can we, you know, physically or intentionally do to really echo that voice out? I mean, is it within the educational system? Is it, you know, what how can we be a champion for this?
Oh, I've been in the education system for 40 years, and I tell you, there are so, you know, administrators, you know, they look at the bottom line, you know, bottom line. There's no word on the bottom line anymore. It's the numbers on the bottom line. The words have disappeared, and it's much cheaper if you have a lot of online program. So if you want to learn another language, wonderful online program. And what does the teacher do? Well, maybe they should find a job somewhere in computers. So in education, we think today that the presence, the embodied presence of the word that the teacher gives to the student and the student gives back to the teacher is sort of an expensive luxury. And then you can save 5 faculty members. That's a bit of money. Now, have I said now that online training is useless? Not at all. Not at all. I think they're wonderful things. I'm learning things online. Again, I say, where is the balance? We do need that direct interaction, and we need it more than ever. And we have to be extremely careful of not moving too much into this way of dealing with human learning in a non-direct person-to-person way. So what do I want you to do in the next few weeks before, of course, all of you take this webinar about Herman Hesse? Well, a little thing, very simple. Find a truly inspirational short poem, memorize it, and speak it, and share it with someone else. And then play a little bit with it. Emphasize, maybe when you say it, emphasize the consonants, emphasize the vowels. Try different intonations. Play a little bit with your voice. And just bring it into vocal presence. And also see if you find a partner, what happens if your partner pays attention to what you have to say and how that enriches your interaction in many ways beyond the particular words that you see in the dictionary. You have an opportunity there for an incredibly great intimate bond. So read out loud, memorize, and share a poem by Rumi, by Rilke, by Kabir, by Goethe, by Shakespeare, by whoever is your favorite poem. Because, you know, the bards were so important. The storyteller, the oral tradition, extremely, those are the carrier of a wisdom that needs to be transmitted in person. And these metaphors that poems sometimes work for months on, or these rhymes, or these rhythms, they activate something in you. And they activate, I would say, a deep trust that we are connected to the whole cosmos and to nature. Whereas the electronic speech has a tendency to disconnect, to functionalize. And all you get back is your intention. There's nothing more boring in a conversation if people hit each other with their intentions. There is this common, we are looking together with great patience and I would say curiosity. What will the next sentence bring to the two of us?
Beautifully put.
You know, I tell you what it will bring right now. It will bring a great unexpected gift.
That's so beautiful. It's just a great example of it as well. And Ludwig, thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge, and also with, you know, that authenticity and presence that you talk about, that you really bring to the table too, and you know, opening your heart, your soul, your mind. And this is what the world needs. We need, you know, to really convey all of these knowledges that so many individuals have, and especially, you know, cultivating the art of language. And I once again want to also mention to all of our viewers that you also mentioned that Ludwig, you are hosting a webinar in October on the 4th, 14th, 21st, and 28th, 4 sessions on Herman Hesse's Soul, Self, and Society in the Times of Crisis. So, you know, if you're interested more in that, reach out to Ludwig, or also go into Humanity Rising Solutions website and read more about it. It's truly going to be exciting to follow that and all of your work. And once again, Ludwig, thank you so much for your advice, and especially that rounding off advice of all of us really, you know, opening our hearts to poetry or mantras or prayers, and cultivating it and sharing it, because we all need small stepping stones of you know, sacred action as well. So thank you so much for that. And I also want to mention on Monday, Jim Garrison is back, and then it's a new session. And that session is about feminine intelligence for a regenerative future. So if you want to read more about that before the session, you can also go on humanityrising.solutions. And to take a bit of advice from you, Ludwig, I have a little Soul Awakening book here. Oops, see if you can see it there. And an easy, an easy soul awakening prayer for everyone to remember if you want it is soul awakening, heart opening, light shining, love flowing, wounds dissolving, peace radiating. So there are simple ways to find those small words. Ludwig, thank you so much. Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you. That's been a pleasure.
And look forward to your webinar in October, and also to welcome you back once again to Humanity Rising to continue the conversation.
Yes, wonderful. I'm ready.
Thank you so much to all of our viewers as well, and stay safe and healthy, and see you all hopefully on Monday. Thank you.
May the word be with you.
May the word be with you.